guys, welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Jamie. I read, I crochet, and I have cats. And today I am talking through the books I finished in the fourth week of 2024, which is also the fourth week of January 2024. I finished 5 books this week. Out of which 3 were actually in print, as opposed to last week where none of them were. So it's an improvement. I'm still aiming to try and finish more of the books that are actually on my shelves. Yeah. It's an improvement, and I finished some fatter books. So the stack of books I finished this week does help with the volume of books on my shelves. Just a smidgen. I have more books that I'm in progress with. So by the end of the month, assuming that this weekend goes well, I usually have more reading time the second half of the weekend because I work in a food pantry Fridays and Saturdays right now. So my weekend doesn't really feel like a weekend till after those 2 shifts are over. So I'm looking at the rest of tonight and tomorrow. It is currently Saturday night, late at night. And I ought to actually finish a book before I go to bed tonight, and probably 1 or 2 more tomorrow. So by the end of the month, I don't know how many books I'll have actually finished. I might be caught up. So that's usually how my reading goes. I've had a few people ask actually, how do you do the whole, 1 a day thing? Is it actually 1 a day? And I read so many books at the same time. If I'm in a mood for a different book, I usually have several books that are different feels to them. So I can just bounce between books that I've already started, make progress in each one. I try and get to a good stopping point before I put it down, so that when I pick it up again, I'm not in the middle of a scene. At the end of an episode kind of thing. So usually when you read books like that, you get to a point where a lot of books are close to done all at the same time. So you'll have one day where you finish 5 or 6 books all on the same day. You didn't read 5 or 6 books in one day, but you read the last bit of 5 or 6 books in the same day. That happens a lot. And I have a feeling that's how January might end, is with a lot of books that are coming to a close around the same time. Yeah, so I'm pretty close. I think I'm 3 books behind schedule right now. Something like that. So the books I finished in print are Dreamcatcher, House of Rugo, and Possession. Now, Possession is a book about academics. This book centers around some academics in Britain and America, United States of America, that are obsessed with finding documentary evidence for or against the hypothesis that a particular poet had an affair with another particular poet for a little while in a particular summer. That's, yeah. It's not a relationship that was obviously impactful in a way where there's a secret woman that they're finding the name of. No, it's possible that he might have had a relationship with somebody, and that might have been his muse for something. But it's not necessarily that there even was a particular muse. It felt a lot like a lot of minutia that a lot of academics I know, when I was in academia, briefly, I was only in grad school, so I didn't get all the way in. I just, dangled my toes in the water a little bit. But That is academia. You find those little niggling questions, and you zero in on them, and you write papers on them, and you get grants for them, and nobody outside academia even knows that it's a question and doesn't care what the answer is. And yeah. There are days that I still wonder why I left academia, and I should have been on a track to be a professor by now, and I'm not. There are reasons for that. It has a lot more to do with mental health than with any actual active choices. It's not like I actually sat down and said, hey, I don't want to be a professor anymore. But yeah, even had my mental health been great, even if I'd had all of the mental health supports and disability services supports that I probably should have thought about pursuing during school, I'm not sure that I would have been thrilled about spending the rest of my life focusing in on minutia. I think eventually that would have been draining. There are other ways to go at being an academic, but that definitely wouldn't have been me. I don't know. You might still see me, turning into a professor so-and-so, in the next 10, 15 years. I do have most of masters, so a couple years from now, I could be a professor. It could happen. We'll see. In the meantime, though, Possession was okay. I don't think that you need to read it before you die. If you are in academia, you might find this an amusing book. There are some funny scenes, and you can relate to the characters, definitely. If you're not in academia, it's a 550-page book, and not a lot really happens. And it's not really very interesting for large bits of the book. It's nicely written. AS Byatt does write very well. So lots of quotable passages, and, it's pretty. But there are other books that I thought the plot was easier to follow, and it was a lot more exciting, and I could talk about it to people around me that are not academics in ways that they actually understood what was going on and were interested. I had a hard time with that with this book. A lot of people, especially doing reading sprints and talking with people about what I'm reading a lot, off of screen. I really, really had a hard time summarizing, okay, what's going on in my book that you would care about. Well, they might have found a letter that might have proven that Poet A met Poet B sometime. Great. Lovely. It took how many pages to get to this? Right. So that's the kind of book it is. It's not terrible. I'm not sure most of my friends would get much out of it outside of my academia circle. Some of them probably have already read it. The rest of them, if they're into reading novels, might read it. But unfortunately, most of the academia circles that I was in, I'm not sure they read much fiction. I think they might actually read more things for their field. You never know. So, in the meantime, let's move on to the next book, which is House of Rugo by Jenny Jaeckel. Did I like this book? The first section of this book, it's set in Martinique during the slave-run plantation era. So sugar plantations, they're bringing in slaves by the shipload directly from Africa, and it's brutal and really harsh conditions, and horrible masters, and just I've read other books set in the sugar plantations in the Caribbean islands. And they all agree on that part. It's definitely the same setting. I recognized where we were before they mentioned the name of the island. I'm like, oh, I'll bet it's one of these 3 islands. And sure enough, it was one of those 3 islands. So it's at least consistent. Which also says the other books I read were probably also pretty similarly accurate. Because they're all zeroing in on the same picture. So that's great. And the setting is horrible, so that part's not great. But the portrayal of that era was good in this book. And it was well done. It was lovely. It wasn't overly gruesome. It wasn't sugarcoating the gruesomeness either. So that's good. The characters were lovely. You actually care about them. You know, you feel, like you want to know what happens next. At the end of that section, all of a sudden, magically, we have moved forward a lot. From the 1800s to now all of a sudden we're in 1940s. And how did we get there? We don't know. Somehow, the people that we were following in Martinique are gone. There's no similar names. There's no clues, really, that the people that we were just following have anything to do with the people that we're now looking at in the U.S. in the 1940s. That was jarring. And I'm not sure if that jarringness was part of what made it so hard to get back into the book for the rest of the book. Or if the rest of the book was equally jarring in and of itself. I suspect the latter, because the next section after the 1940s, we're now in the 1960s. So we've jumped another generation. And now we're in Canada. Which, at the end of the 1940s bit, they do end up in Canada or something like that. Canada's in there. But, yeah. It was confusing. And I'm not really even sure, now that I think of it, where... Because there's the 40s, there's the 60s. I could have sworn that the draft dodging was in the 60s. So then there might have been another section in there. Anyway. Somehow you're in the U.S. and then you're in Canada. And then after Canada, we now jump backwards to the 1920s. Which was really disorienting. And then it goes backwards in time for every section following that. Until the last one, which I think goes forward again a little bit. And that kind of timeline, if it was a bunch of linked short stories, if each section was actually a coherent story arc with character development and setting and everything, a coherent short story that could stand alone as a short story, but where the characters were linked, where you could see the links, that would be cool. If the writing quality was as good as the first section, especially, that could have been a 5-star linked short stories novel. That I could see. A novel in short stories, basically. I still have issues with the jumping around the timeline because it doesn't ever cohere into one storyline. It's just a bunch of disjointed bits. And after a while, you do kind of get this nebulous idea that some of these people are related or even the same people. But the reversing the time bit in the middle, I wasn't really quite sure that which people were the same people after a while. It just was not working. That was confusing. And it was confusing when I had just finished it. Now that it's been a day or two since I finished it, I did not retain a lot from exactly what happened when and how, because it just didn't make sense to begin with. So if you're writing a novel and you're thinking about doing something clever with going forward and backward and forward and backward with your timeline, don't do it. That was terrible. That in and of itself probably knocked about half a star off my rating on this book. Just because it doesn't work with the way your brain works as a human being. That just did not happen. And then the writing style, the first section was really well done. And after that, I felt like the rest of it, maybe the first part was the part where the author spent a lot more time on it and, really getting it perfect, and then just didn't spend as much time on the rest of the sections. They were just good enough to go with the book. Something along those lines. That was kind of my impression. Because the first section read as a 5-star. The rest of the book, if it had made sense in story order in some way, and tightening up the storytelling a little bit, it still would have only rated about a 4-star. So, yeah. The author, though, and is capable of the kind of writing that's in the first section. Capable of a 5-star, certainly. Maybe better at short form than novels. That's something that we might see in the future. If this author is still publishing, maybe short story collections would be more promising than a novel. Because it may be that that she does really well with things about the length of that first section and just loses steam. And there are short story writers that just can't really do a novel. They just don't think like that. And, conversely, there are people that can write a novel, but they try and condense a story into a short story, and they just can't do it. So it's not anything against the author. This book did not do it for me. And I suspect that in this form, it won't do it for a lot of people. The final edition, the printed edition, might be better, because this was an ARC. And it might be that some of my complaints no longer apply to the finished product. I suspect, though, with all of the things that I had issues with in this ARC, most of them probably were not fixed for the final copy. So, if you read the final copy and it turned out that they fixed all that, let me know, because I do want to be fair to this book. If they were very well aware that all those things were a problem and they fixed it all, that's great. That's wonderful. But I did not enjoy this book enough to seek out the final copy to find out, because I wasn't engaged in it enough by halfway through to do more than just finish the ARC. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm done with the book. I will be watching for future books by this author because I got the impression that they have the talent to write books that I do want to read. Just maybe not this book. So, anyway, that was House of Rugo by Jaeckel. I do love the cover. I love the colors on that cover. I think that's why I put in for that one, because it looks pretty. And I did like the subject matter. I don't remember what the blurb said about it. Anyway, the last book on my stack of finished books, this one I started in October. So I've been working on it forever. I've read over 50% of Stephen King's novels at this point. This is not my favorite. This is not my top 10. The ones that I rate in my top 10, I usually don't take months to read. So that's a big giveaway right there. This book is really, really poorly paced, first of all. And the character development and the introduction of the characters is done in such a way that I did not care about any of the characters by the time anything gruesome started happening. So when bad things start happening to the characters that you're following, and you don't know the characters well enough to care about the characters at all, then you don't particularly care if the bad things are happening to the characters or to somebody else. So that was a problem. The gruesome stuff that was happening was unexplained in such a way that it was more random than worked for actually building a story. And it was gross. Really, that was all I got for the longest time. Like, boring, 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 gross, boring. And then a little bit more gross. And then weird, gross, and boring. Which is not a really good structure for a book. So I had issues with that. There were scenes that I liked. There were descriptions I liked. By the end of the book, when it all comes together and you know what's going on, I like the premise. I like the overall story of this book. Yeah. There's also the bit about that Stephen King's music taste and mine don't coincide very well. So this is one of those where he references a lot of song lyrics, and he'll have, snatches of song lyrics that he'll put in the page, and trying to get you in the mood of the scene. You can kind of have the soundtrack going on in the back, while you're reading. I don't like a lot of the songs that he zeroes in on in a lot of his books. And this is one of those where the songs didn't help for me. It may be a generational thing, and that he's a guy and he's from a different region, but that just added to the "this is not a book for me" sort of feel. And by the end of it, I liked the general structure of the story, but I still didn't really care about the characters. And, I don't know if I was rooting for the aliens. It's not much of a spoiler that there's aliens, but there's aliens. I won't tell you more about the aliens because they're not what I expected. And so we'll leave it at that for the aliens. But I might have been kind of rooting for them and sympathetic for them and not so keen on the humans by the end of the book. Maybe. Just slightly. So yeah, as far as successful Stephen King books go, it's not. I know there are other people that really liked it. When I initially started talking about it, when I put it on my TBR last year, there were several people that chimed in that it's one of their favorite Stephen Kings. And I'm actually curious as to what about it makes it a favorite. If it's one of your favorites, then obviously either we just have different tastes, which totally works. I'm a 40-something female with a certain background. And so some books are just not going to be for me, just for that. But if there's something I missed that makes this a better book than I caught on to, or some element of this book that stuck out for you that made it great, then yeah, let me know in the comments what you thought about Dreamcatcher. For me, it ranks right up there with Under the Dome. That the ideas were good, but the execution was boring and just never really grabs you. Under the Dome, by the way, is one where I really felt like a whole solid chunk of 400 or maybe 600 pages could just be lopped out of the middle and then just stick what's left back together and kind of fiddle with where it comes together to make it seamless again. And that would be a good book. Because stuff happens at the beginning and stuff happens at the end and nothing really happens for most of the book. So it was on par with Under the Dome. Not a terrible book in that I was not repulsed by it. I did finish it. I enjoyed enough of it that I was not in pain reading this book. But yeah. So with that as my physical books for this week, and then the audiobook I started out with was The Glass Cell by Patricia Highsmith, which was okay, but it was my least favorite Patricia Highsmith. I was annoyed for most of this week because all the books I was reading, they weren't terrible. They weren't books where I could really, grumble about them a lot. They were just meh. Even the good ones were just kind of on the good end of meh. But I finally got a 5-star at the end of the week because I read 11 by Patricia Highsmith. It's a collection of short stories with 2 stories in particular that make snails scary. Yes, snails. Like the things with the shells, they kind of squishy inside. They just, kind of trundle along and make, slime trails and those things. There are 2 stories in Patricia Highsmith's short story collection 11 that make snails scary. So, you need to read the book, find out for yourself why snails are scary. The one with the giant snails, it was a good thing I was reading that collection for Neva's 24-hour readathon, which happened last night and today, because I didn't do much sleeping, so I didn't do much dreaming either, so I didn't have nightmares about giant snails. But it was definitely one of those stories that could lead to some really bizarre nightmares. And I might still have those, because now that I've been talking about them, I'm sure I've primed my brain to have snails. Yay, snails. And there were some other really good stories in that collection as well. If I acquire any hard copies of Patricia Highsmith, that might be one that I end up getting a copy of, just because some of those stories were really good. And I might actually want to reread them. I'm working on a few books right now. I should finish quite a few books all at once by the end of the month. I have to finish the Buddha of Suburbia before the end of the month. So I will be working on that while this video uploads, so that I'm that much closer to finishing it on time, because that is for points for the Reading 1001 group on Goodreads. And if I don't finish it, it jeopardizes my ability to build up additional points in future months. So, lots riding on actually finishing the book for that game in the month that it's assigned for. I will do a TBR video coming up soon for my February TBR and February plans. At the moment, I don't have any major February plans, which is nice, because January I had TBR-a-thon, Adventure-a-thon, which is still ongoing. I don't know what the time scale is for that one. If it's ends in January and we start something else, I don't get that sense, but I have no idea. But this month has been busy between Adventure-a-thon and TBR-a-thon, and all the reading sprints and kind of solidarity rereading of some of the Wheel of Time books, which I am still doing. I think the group that's starting with The Eye of the World in January is finally getting to The Great Hunt. I've re-listened to the audiobook of The Eye of the World twice this month while they're catching up. Yeah. But not in a painful way. I've been enjoying my revisiting of those books. So, for February, I do have a few books I know that I'm going to be getting to. I'm going to be tackling the audiobook of The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. That's the one that Joe Spivey did a casting of it when he read it last year, last month, something like that. So I was going to read that book, not reread it, but read it, and cast it, because that's something I usually do for long classics, just for myself. So I was thrilled that somebody else has done it too. So now I can see what my cast looks like and how my movie of The Way We Live Now varies with respect to his. So that's something I'm going to be tackling in February, since I don't have a lot of else going on next month. And then there's also a read-along for, I know I'm not going to get the title of this book right, but the Stephen King book about the Kennedy assassination, which I will find between now and when I do a video about it, because it's somewhere on one of my shelves. I know I have it. Did I find it tonight before this video? No. So those are 2 books I know I'm going to be reading in February. I am also reading Capital by Karl Marx. That was my 24 tomes in 24 pick for February. The number picked by the Reading 1001 group TBR game was 24, and the book that corresponds to number 24 on my list of 24 tomes is Capital by Karl Marx, the 3 volumes of Capital by Karl Marx. So I will be tackling Capital starting in February. I'm still working on Sources of Chinese Tradition, but I am not expecting that the books that I'm reading for the 24 tomes in 24, I'm not expecting that I finish them in the month I start them. Most of them are the kinds of things where you read a bit at a time and just, over the course of the year you finish it. So I'm just starting them on particular months and then reading them as long as it takes to finish them. But actually getting them started is the biggest part. I expect to be finished with Sources of Chinese Tradition pretty quickly. There will be books on the February TBR relating to Confucian Chinese stuff. There's a murder mystery series set in an era in Chinese history where Confucianism was a lot more dominant than it is now. So that will be part of my TBR. That should be fun. But I will talk more about my TBR soon. And I will be updating my genre blanket soon. Genre blanket. Look at that. It's a blanket. It's not very long, but it actually is looking like a blanket now. And the top is very yellow, but Possession and 11 are not on this blanket yet. So I have 5 more rows to add while listening to the audiobook that I'm finishing up now. And 3 of those go to 11 because the short stories are the white popcorns on the colored background. So that's 2 rows just to get the popcorns in the background plus the ratings row. And then Possession is the color row and the ratings row. So 5 rows that I have to finish between now and probably tomorrow so that I don't get too behind. And then I'll also hopefully finish the audiobook I'm on now, and then I'll still be behind. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So Blanket's coming along well. I don't know how long it'll be before it's square. Probably won't make it to the end of February before I start the next one at this rate. So we'll see about that. And hopefully I'll have another nonfiction done soon because it's getting awfully yellow at this point. Yeah, if you are doing a genre blanket and I don't know about it yet, put a link in the comments if you do a video about it, or, let me know how your genre blanket is going. Yeah, I'll try and make sure that I put everything in the description that I said I was putting in the description. It might take a while to actually put it all in there, so check back if there was something you were hoping for, or ask in the comments if there's something specifically you want. And I will catch you again soon. Bye, guys.